Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm in Memphis, Tennessee today, in front of the Lorraine Motel where Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968. I wanted to start this new Death Row Stories video here because the person I'm going to introduce to you today was a long-term activist in the civil rights movement. Her name is Gloria Rubac, and today at each and every execution in Huntsville, Texas, you will see her in front of the Huntsville Unit where the lethal injections take place. She has attended over 400 of these killings carried out by the state. If Texans were interested in the death penalty, she would be a celebrity. I briefly interviewed Gloria during one of the first videos of Death Row Stories. She's a 78-year-old retired teacher, and she spends a lot of her time visiting or writing to inmates on death row. Often the people she knows personally are the ones executed by the state of Texas. I wanted to know more about Gloria's perspective and commitment, so at the end of September I decided to spend some time with her before and during an execution. I wanted to understand why care for a person who committed the worst crime you can think of. We left Houston early that day. Actually, she had something in mind.
Well, we're going to Huntsville for two things. One is to protest the execution tonight, and two, I'm actually going to go to put flowers on graves of people who were executed. Tonight's execution is something that's difficult if you don't know very much about the person that's being executed, because the crime he committed was horrific. As a mother, a grandmother, and a great-grandmother, I mean, it's very painful to hear about somebody stomping I think a 2-year-old child or an infant to death and then tossing their body onto the beach in Galveston and leaving it there. It was a horrible crime, but what I've learned over the last few weeks, the man's name is Travis Mullis, and what I've learned about Travis is that his mom was morbidly obese and smoked, I don't know, I think 4 packs of cigarettes a day and drank alcohol all day when she was pregnant with him. And then she died when he was an infant, and he was left with a stepfather who physically and sexually abused him. So by the time he was 3 years old, he was already having terrible, terrible psychological problems from the trauma that was going on in his life. He wound up living with maybe an aunt and uncle. I can't remember exactly. But his behavior just kept getting worse and worse. And I guess he wasn't taking the drugs that were prescribed for him. So when he turned 18, his aunt told him to either take his medication or get out. So he got out and hooked up with some girl. They had a baby, and he kept looking for a job and couldn't find one. And eventually, I guess, he was riding around with his little baby in the car with him, and the baby wouldn't stop crying. And he said that he tried all kinds of things to stop the crying, and it wouldn't stop. So in his traumatized mind, he decided, I guess I'm going to have to kill this child. But he was a person that society just let fall through the cracks. The schools and the healthcare professionals and so on. People that are mentally ill deserve health care, mental health care, and not to be executed. But, you know, he didn't get that. So that's who's going to be executed tonight, a very, very sick man.
Many people will tell you that you're finding excuses to a horrible crime, right?
I'm not finding excuses, and I sympathize with the family of the child that was killed. I mean, I have kids, but what I can't sympathize with is the state of Texas that has no understanding of how the state should be treating people, and also no understanding that no matter how many people you execute, number one, you're not going to stop crime, and number two, you create another set of victims' families. I don't know if Travis Mullis has any family left that cares about him or not, but many of the men on death row do. And when their loved ones are executed, they're just as much victims as the crime victim's family. So the whole thing is illogical. And one thing we figured out, executions wind up costing Texas and the taxpayers millions and millions of dollars. And it would be, if you want to lock somebody up, you can lock them up, and it's much cheaper. And the victim's family doesn't have to be re-traumatized through appeal after appeal after appeal. And it lets them try to heal and deal with their grief. Grief goes in stages, but if you can't get beyond just being furious, which is what happens way too often because the victims' families are called to testify at so many hearings, it's just wrong, just wrong. So no, I don't make excuses. I try to find reasons why people commit horrific crimes, and this man, Travis Mullis, said he deserves to die. He says he's guilty. But I've met too many people that 10, 15, 20, 30 or more years later are not the same people that committed terrible crimes. People change. And Sister Helen Prejean, who wrote the book that the movie Dead Man Walking was based on, she often says, nobody is the worst thing they've ever done in their life. All of us have done stupid things. I have. I've never killed anybody, but, you know, when I was young, oh my gosh, I was kind of crazy. So people grow out of criminal behavior if they're more or less on an even keel. People who are mentally ill, to begin with, only become more mentally ill if they're put on death row. So it's just not the way to solve crime, not the way to solve problems, not the way to deal with trauma at all.
Some families of victims ask for execution and say that they will have a relief after that.
Yeah. And I think that would be my first reaction if somebody killed one of my kids. You know, kill them. But it's been proven by interviews with families that executions don't bring closure. The grief of having somebody you love murdered, the grief goes through stages, and you have to process it. Whether you lose a loved one to murder or even to a car wreck or cancer or whatever. So yeah, I think that's a natural reaction. Although I think my reaction would be I could strangle somebody with my own hands. But unfortunately, You know, Martin Luther King's wife made a statement about that. She said, as someone whose husband, and I think she said her father-in-law maybe, was murdered, I can tell you that I wouldn't want anybody executed, that I have to deal with my grief and go through the process, and executing a killer would not help.
You think it's important to spend all this energy for this guy, even if he did something horrible? You want to be there when he's executed to show that you're against the death penalty?
Yeah, I think it's important to take a stand against every execution, whether it's this guy who's seriously mentally damaged and committed a terrible crime, or somebody like Ramiro, who was executed in June, who had transformed into such a different person that even the guards didn't think he should be executed. But it's important to take a stand, and it's important for people to understand why Texas and why the southern states in the United States are the states that execute. And it's because it's a continuation of the racism, the lynchings, the horrible things that have happened in the southern states of this country. It's a continuation, and that's why we call them legal lynchings. Yeah, they're lynching somebody, but it's not the Klan taking them out in the middle of the night and hanging them from a tree. It's the government putting poison in them, you know, in the daylight. But it's still killing, and it's still wrong. And it's a continuation of the Confederate States and the Jim Crow South.
How did you get into all that?
In 1982, when the first execution was held in Texas, I mean, nobody had even been talking about executions, right? And back then they were at midnight. So I heard that there was going to be like some sort of vigil at the First Unitarian Church in Houston that night. So I told a friend of mine who's an activist, I said, let's go to the church, see what's going on. And so we did, and then we decided, well, let's go to Huntsville. Both of us had to go to work the next morning, but so we drove to Huntsville. And I was actually appalled when I got to Huntsville. It was dark, and the college students from the university, which is really just a few blocks away, were out there celebrating. They had kegs of beer, and they were yelling, "Fry the N-word," and "hang 'em," and Amnesty International told the protesters we should have a silent protest. And I was angry because I thought, man, if they were killing me, I would want somebody to be yelling in my support. So that stuck with me. And then in the 80s, executions started happening. And I'm trying to, and then we got involved, the community in Houston got involved with Clarence Brantley's case. And I guess that's what really did it, because it was so obvious that Clarence was innocent. It's just too bad it took decades. And I mean, he got out, let's see, he was arrested in 80. I think he got out. I think he got out in 1990. I'm not sure. It took a long time, but at least he survived. But then other innocent people like Shaka Sankofa, who was also known as Gary Graham, had a case of innocence. Oh, totally innocent. And he got executed. And so those cases just kind of built the movement that I became a part of. Before 1924, when somebody was sentenced to death in Texas, They were hung at the town square. And in 1924, this new invention, the electric chair, came into being. So that's when Texas started using the electric chair. The first day they used it, can't remember the date, but I know it was 1924. They executed 5 black men in the electric chair that one day. And I found 2 of their graves at the prison cemetery. So now I need to Google the prison cemetery, and Captain Joe Bird Cemetery, or as the prisoners call it, Peckerwood Hill, has been there since the 1800s. And there's, I don't know, thousands of graves out there of people who have died and nobody claimed the body.
Turn right into the parking lot.
Oh, what parking lot they're talking about? I've never driven in here. Interesting. Okay, Michael is back over there. The last time I was here, I was surprised, I don't know who, but somebody had taken flowers to Michael. His name was Michael Sharp, and it's funny how we met. I was on a radio show one time talking about the death penalty, and people were calling in with questions. So somebody called in and they said, well, how can you talk about these people like they're regular human beings? I said, well, they are regular human beings. They had a mom and dad, and many of them have kids. I said, I may not want to hang out with them on Saturday night, but I will support their right not to be murdered by the state of Texas. So I get this letter the next week from Michael, and he goes, I'd like to invite you to hang out with me on Friday night at Death Row in Huntsville. So he added me to his visitation list, and we visited for years and years till he was executed. We became quite good friends. He was from somewhere out in West Texas. Now look, I should know who this is, but I don't. But you see the X, 93, May 5th. That's somebody who was executed.
All these people here were executed, or not all of them?
No, 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 no. Only if there's an X before their prison number. They had Death Row has a whole different set of prison numbers than general population. This person was executed in 93, but this is his prison number. 6 digits. Now they're up to, I think, 7 or 8 digits. And as you can see, the cemetery isn't very well taken care of. Prisoners actually, in that shack over there, they make these headstones or crosses for the prisoners. Okay, let me see. I think Michael's back here. He was executed. I wound up visiting him for many years. I think Michael's one of these crosses, I think. I think this is Michael up here. Yeah, this has got to be Michael. And nobody's put anything out here. Okay, Michael, I still remember you.
Can you tell me a little bit about him? How long have you been friends, and what was his story?
I don't remember much about his story. He didn't have a case of innocence, but he tried to educate himself on death row and apologize for the things he'd done, and felt a lot of remorse. But like I said, I just met him because he wrote me a letter and said, look, come hang out with me on Saturday night. One of my friends who was a prison activist, her husband had actually been executed in Louisiana. When she died, her son called me. She told me she was going to do this, but her son called me. He says, I have my mom's ashes, and she said, you know what to do with them. So I put them, she wanted her ashes scattered out here on the graves that had the X's. So about 6 of us walked around here and found all the X's and put a little bit of her ashes. Okay, Michael, I'll see you next time. I usually come out here once or twice a year and just visit with him. He was, you know, I don't know what he was like before he went to death row, but he was very sharp, very funny, loved jokes, and we just hung out. So, see you next time, Michael. All of these graves are people that, oh my God, they go way over there now. People who died while they were in prison and the family or nobody claimed their body. There was a black section, a Mexican section or Latino section, and then a white section. The black section, blacks sometimes, they have a history of naming their kids with titles like sergeant or general or, I don't know, different names. I could recognize some of those names. And then, of course, the ones that are in Spanish are obvious. And then the O'Reillys and O'Neills were the white folks. But way over there, you can't even see over there, are the graves from the 1800s. And that's where I found 2 graves, 2 of the graves for the 5 men that were electrocuted in 1924. And I always talk about one of them because his name was George Washington. And I think about his mom when she was pregnant and she was having this little baby, naming him after the first president of the United States. Probably not even realizing that George Washington owned slaves, but she obviously had great hopes for her son. And now he's in the prison cemetery. So there's a lot of history out here. Most of these poor souls didn't have anybody. So they're not doing the crosses anymore, they're doing those tombstone-looking things. I guess we should get over to the walls and start getting set up for the protest for the 590th execution. God. I remember thinking way back, oh, we'll never even hit 100. Now we're fixing to hit 600.
Do you feel sometimes discouraged?
I did. Back in, I think it was 1999 or 98 when there was like 49 executions almost every week. And I thought, oh God, if I drive to Huntsville one more time, I'm gonna go crazy. But no, now I'm very optimistic. And I'm glad I've lived this long because executions are down, support is down. Last year, 2023, for the first time, more people were executed than were sent to death row. So the beds aren't being filled. So that's good. And I hope I live long enough to see 0 sent to death row. Ugh.
We are at the Huntsville Unit in Huntsville, Texas, formerly known as the Walls Unit. The Huntsville Unit is where they carry out the executions. They are housed in Livingston. The men are housed in Livingston. The women are housed in Gatesville, but both are executed here at this prison. As you remember, not too long ago, there was a fire that damaged part of the unit. Thank God there were some officers that risked their lives to get those execution drugs. Because they did. They did. They concentrated on those drugs, let me tell you.
Hey, y'all. Ready for another fucking murder? So tonight's execution of Travis Mullis is a sad, sad story. We offer our support for the family of the child that was killed, and we support him not to have his life taken by the state of Texas. Thank everybody for coming out here and being a part of the protest today. You know, Texas, we are fixing to have 600 executions pretty soon. So we have tonight's execution next Tuesday, and then October 15th. A man who has been on death row when there was never a crime. No crime, but he has spent over 20 years on death row, Robert Robertson from Palestine. When Roberts took his little girl Nikki to the hospital after she fell out of bed and was having trouble breathing, the people at the hospital suspected that Robert wasn't telling them the truth, that he must have killed the child. Well, Robert is autistic. And if you know anything about autism, people with autism do not respond the way I do, and I get very emotional about things. They said he had a flat expression, so that made him a murderer. They said when the investigator went to his house to look at things, Robert made himself a sandwich. The investigator thought that was weird. Well, that was his routine. And as an autistic man, he stuck to his routine. That didn't make him a murderer. They also said because after his little girl Nikki fell out of bed, he dressed her instead of just grabbing her in whatever she was sleeping in and taking her to the hospital. That was the routine that goes with autism. Now, Texas wants to murder Robert. That's on October 15th. What happened last year in 2023 is pretty amazing. Last year, there were less people sent to death row in Texas than were executed. That's the first time that's ever happened. For decades, Texas was killing, and Harris County, Bexar County, Fort Worth, Tarrant County, they were sending people to fill those beds as quick as Texas could kill them. That's not happening anymore. We are seeing the end of the death penalty. It's going to be a slow, painful death, but it is ending. And it's thanks to people like y'all who are out here and active that this is going to end in Texas. Texas may be the last state to get rid of it, but it's going to end. Anybody want to talk? Yeah, you want to say something?
My name is Pam Perillo, and I was on death row for 20 years. And I came 2 days away from one of my executions. I think that it's wrong that Texas does what it does. From what I understand, tonight's execution is very sad because this man doesn't want to live anymore. But think about the years and the days that he spends in there in total hell. They have no contact with each other. very little conversation with each other. They go years and years without any human touch. And they wonder why we turn into animals. Because they treat us like animals. Killing people is not right. Killing people is just exactly what you're saying is wrong. And you're sitting in there killing us. I think about all the friends that I lost when I was on death row. Carla Faye Tucker, Frances Newton, Betty Beats, all of the women that I sit there with for years and years and I had to see leave and go get executed. It's not easy going through that. It's not easy for our families as well as it's not easy for the victims' families. And trust me, my heart does go out to them.
I'm gonna go talk to these students. Yeah. Hello, what are y'all studying? Criminal justice, that's what I figured. We've been fighting this thing for decades, since before y'all were born, probably. Because the execution started back in '82. There was a time when the Supreme Court had stopped all the executions, and then they resumed them in 76. Did your teacher send you over here, or one of y'all the teacher? No? Oh, you just came over? Yeah. Oh, cool. So you're skipping class? No. Okay.
Are y'all against the death penalty or pro death penalty? I personally have mixed opinions on it. I think it can be, it's a very controversial topic for me.
Well, it's been shown that it's not a deterrent to crime, and that's one reason people support it. As somebody who grew up in the 60s and was active in the civil rights movement, I opposed it from a long time ago because it's very racist. If you kill a black person, you're less likely to get the death penalty. It's like black lives don't matter. The majority of people on death row are black and brown.
Is this really how we want to honor victims of such horrendous crimes?
He pleaded guilty. So if, like, the way I see it is that if you keep him, like, he's for life, whatever, in prison. Yeah. At the end of the day, you're just filling up the capacity of people in prison and making less room for others that should be there for a year or two, or whatever the case is. But then I'm also against it when it comes to innocent people that don't even get proven guilty at that point yet. So I feel like she had said, it was a very controversial way.
Just recently, the 200th person was exonerated off death row. I think Texas has like 15 people that have been exonerated, and who knows, I mean, I know a number who were innocent who were executed. Florida has the most exonerations, but 200 people in this country were spent years or decades on death row, and then they get exonerated. I just sat in a federal court in Houston for a guy whose lawyer was so bad, they actually put him on the stand. I couldn't believe he wasn't dressed like a lawyer. I thought they'd found some jerk on the street. But they asked him what kind of mitigation they presented in his trial, trying to defend this guy so that people could consider his life and things that he'd gone through. And the lawyer, well, he's disbarred, he's not a lawyer anymore. He goes, well, what do you mean by mitigation? And I'm like, oh, Jesus, this guy was appointed to defend him? It's really... Now, what's happening? Whatever happened, I hope Travis Mullis did not suffer, and we will be back here next Tuesday night, October 1st, when my friend Garcia Glenn White is scheduled to be murdered. Oh, thanks to everybody.
Over the past weeks, I recorded several interviews. Among them features a story that needs to be told. I don't want to say too much, but trust me, don't miss this coming episode. Please subscribe to Death Row Stories. Hitting that subscribe button is important to show YouTube that people are interested in that work. And if you don't need to watch the video, you can just listen. The podcast is available on Amazon Music, Apple Podcast, Spotify, Deezer, YouTube Podcast. The podcast is perfect for your daily commute or while on the go. Thank you very much for your support. See you soon.